Well, hello out there in How to Protect the Ocean Land. You're probably wondering why I am here and who I am. Well, I'm Dave Ebert, and I'm typically Andrew Lewin's co-host for the Beyond Jaws podcast. But today there's been a friendly takeover that I've commandeered the show today to have on a special guest, someone who's never been a guest in the show before, and that is Andrew Lewin. And Andrew's here to talk about a job he just obtained. He's going to be starting out here in the next week or two, and kind of following the theme that we talk about on the Beyond Jaws podcast, and a theme that Andrew's been talking about on How to Protect the Ocean this week is your career path. How do you go about finding jobs and finding that job you really are passionate about and how you love that job? And so today I'm going to be the host, and we're going to be talking to Andrew, and he may or may not regret at the end of the show whether I take over. But with that, let me introduce you to my special guest today, Andrew Lewin. Andrew, welcome
Hello,
to the
everybody.
show.
Thanks, Dave. Lovely to be here. So happy to be on this wonderful podcast that's been built.
Yeah, we only have the biggest names in this podcast, as you know. So, so tell us how. So you got this. You got a new job now. We're going to talk about. But before we talk about this job, why don't you share with everyone, how did you get it? You've been doing this sort of YouTube podcast stuff for 16 years now.
16 years, yeah.
Yeah, and so you were really kind of early on in the infancy of this whole genre. And why don't you share with everybody, how did you, going back to 2010, how did you see the writing on the wall for this whole area?
Well, I'll be honest, I didn't see the writing on the wall right off the bat. I was more of a victim of circumstance in a way. Made some choices in my life that I'm still proud of today, but made some hard choices in my life about picking, a job in marine biology or raising a family in the place that I grew up, which was not by the coast, which is hard to hold a marine biology job when you're not by an ocean coast, right? I live by the Great Lakes, which is lovely to live by, but I live in Ontario, Canada. There's obviously no ocean around us. And so, I was talking to my wife of 20 years now, but back then, we were planning out our life and we were discussing where we were going to live, and we wanted to raise our kids, around our family. And I'll be honest, I didn't really want that right off the bat. I wanted to explore and go and raise our kids around the world and wherever this marine biology place could take it. Because Dave, as you know, it could take you pretty much anywhere. And when you live in Canada too, you have 3 coasts to go to. There's also the option back then of the U.S., which was probably those are the geographies that were what I was looking at. But these are difficult decisions to make. You have to make this personal decision. I knew it was going to be a tough one. I chose love and I chose family over the job, which again I don't regret because we've had a fantastic life. It's really great to see to raise kids around grandparents and uncles and aunts and things like that. So I think that was really good. I didn't see right off the bat, but as my kids were growing up, they're now, my oldest daughter's now in university, doing marine biology or wildlife biology. And my youngest daughter is, almost out of high school now. She's a junior, I guess is what you say. Is that grade 11 is a junior? Yeah. So she's in grade 11 going to grade 12 next year. So, they're older now, but we've been able to raise our kids in a familiar place, and around family, which has been wonderful. But it also has been a challenge to be around the ocean or be working within the ocean during that time. And so in the early 2000s, I did my master's. I came back here. I did my master's out in Halifax. Came back here and worked some private consulting jobs, which it paid the bills. I got to do some ocean stuff. I got to do some riverine stuff, some lake work, really kind of cool stuff I got to do. And that was a lot of fun, but it just didn't do everything I wanted to do. 1, it wasn't in oceans. 2, all the time. It was mostly riverine and lakes. 2, it was, it was working for a lot of private consulting that I was doing was working for industry. And it's good work because you're working for industry to make sure they're following regulations, but you're working with industries like oil and gas and like mining, and eventually what's going to happen once they scout out sites, once they find hydrocarbon places where they can drill, eventually it's going to happen where they're going to drill, they're going to ruin the environment at some point in a specific area. No matter what environmental experiments you do and environmental assessments, impact assessments, it's still going to be, it's taxing on the mind for someone who wants to protect the planet rather than harm it even more. So that was short-lived for about maybe 5 or 6 years. And then I started to, I was on my own for a little bit, and I've always had this entrepreneurial motivation in me. And so like even in my master's, I was big into the marine aquarium hobby. That was my geeky kind of hobby. And when I lived out in Halifax, it's a lot more expensive to have that hobby in Halifax because the transportation. Coming to Toronto, where I lived, it's a big hub. It's an international hub, one of the biggest airports in the world. But going to Halifax, it's an extra flight. It's hard to get to. So not as many shipments we were getting to Halifax. So the prices were increasing. So as a true entrepreneur would do, it's like, I can do better. And so I tried to do better. I could not do better. I did not have that business mindset at that point to do what I wanted to do. But regardless, I tried, and there were, let's just say, I was in a 1-bedroom apartment, living with a buddy of mine and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we had aquariums everywhere. All over the house. Like, it was everywhere. Let's just say, like, we never had to worry about moisturizing skin because, like, the heat and the salt in the air was quite wonderful. But anyway, that was my first entrepreneurial sort of venture. And then afterwards, like after I stopped the consulting for a bit, I tried to do that on my own for a little bit. Did a couple jobs with government where I got to do some like GIS and marine protected area planning stuff for Department of Fisheries and Oceans here in Canada, and then I started to kind of get the bug of like, hey, I wanted to stay in touch with a lot of the people that I've stayed in touch with either online, like Twitter and Facebook were starting to come, and YouTube were starting to come bigger and bigger online. 2008, 2009. Podcasting was starting to come big, although I hadn't really heard of podcasting at that point. I didn't know exactly what it was. I just thought it was radio. That's basically what I thought. And then I get this this bug in me where I'm just like, I'm going to start a blog. I'm just gonna start a blog where every day I'm going to write about something. Something in the ocean, an article or something I have on mind. And then I realized, like, writing is not easy. It's hard, and I'm not good at it, and I don't like it. So that was a very quick kind of way of doing things, right? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to ask you. So you're getting this interest, and I can tell you for writing, I find there's two ways. Either people have a knack for writing, or they don't. I didn't, but I learned to.
Right.
So writing,
right.
I just mentioned that you can learn to write. I couldn't write to save my life until grad school, and then where you had to learn how to write. And then I found I really got into it. But yeah, it's something you got to learn to do. But while you had this passion to pursue this, obviously you had to pay some bills and keep going. And so this was really a side gig you had going with the writing and the blogs and all this stuff.
It was literally a side hustle. So while I was off of work, I really started. I had like my kids were toddlers at the time, so I was I was busy. Obviously, being a dad, I was busy with my work, and then so I got to do it during the day. And then finally, I was like, "This is ridiculous. I need to get a job because it's not paying any kind of bills. So I need to get a job." I actually was fortunate enough to get a job for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. It was an awesome job. Like my first job there was wonderful. I was working with a fellow by the name of Dr. Nick Mandrak, who's actually, Dave, you'd get along really well with him. He's an ichthyologist as well, and he have you ever heard of Crossman and Crossman, like the field identification book for fishes?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So that was his advisor. Crossman was his advisor, and he actually, there's a book called Crossman and Mandrak. Nick Mandrak was my boss at the time, and I'll be honest, it was such a good gig because he was in like, he was a researcher, but he was in an administration position where he had to do a lot of meetings across the border because Great Lakes is all about cross-border relations and things like that in science. We were on the science side, and so he had like an Excel sheet of projects to do. Like, it was like a long, like 200 projects, because basically the public would ask us questions and we would have to find out the answers. Mm-hmm. And so they were really cool things. And so he would have me do all these projects, and he goes, "Okay, I'm away for 2 weeks in meetings. if you need anything, this is how long ago it was, hit me up on my BlackBerry. And I'm like, all right, cool, no problem. He goes, but if you don't need, you just do it. If you have questions, we can get to it. As long as you can move on to another project, I'll give you like 6 or 7 projects at a time, and I'll get to work on. But it was all science stuff. It was all stats. I was a geek at that point. There was some GIS. We were doing like Asian carp risk assessments. We were trying to find out how similar the fish assemblages were in each lake over time. So we had data back to like the 1800s and then all the way like to present day. So we were kind of looking, they got similar as the lock system kind of got built in and stuff. And it was just really cool things, right? Every day was different. So I really, really enjoyed that. Which is kind of funny because it's going to come into play in a bit. But yeah, and then of course the government comes in, and we had a conservative government, so they wanted to cut a lot of stuff that was happening at Fisheries and Oceans for a number of different reasons. So the position that I was about to move into permanently got cut because it was just a empty position on the org chart. And so instead of affecting somebody who's already in a position, they just cut that position out. So I was kind of stuck. I went into doing more database management and GIS management, which I learned a lot, but I wasn't having as much fun. So eventually I left that position. But while this was happening, I was doing science communication on the side because that's what I was realizing. Even though I didn't like writing, I was doing like YouTube videos, and then I started the podcast. But I was just like, this is what's fun. Like telling stories, like looking at articles and telling people about stories in the ocean. That's what I really enjoyed to do. And over time, I started to realize that every time I was on a boat, like back in a couple of my jobs were just field work. Anytime I was on a boat, I love the times, when you're not working outside, it's say the day's done, you're on a ship and you're just all around, you're all having dinner, and then you're just trading stories from the field. And, I was on a boat. One of my first jobs was at Louisiana University's Marine Consortium down in Louisiana. And we would have researchers come out. We were basically like a business, and we would have researchers come out and do field work, and they would rent the ship, and I would be the marine technician on the ship. So I would get people from all over the states, all over the world, really, and I'd be listening to their stories. I was a young kid at that point, listening to their stories about, how they got seasick somewhere, or how, like they lost instrumentation somewhere, like just fun, like weird kind of stories that would happen out in the field. And as I started doing the science communications, like, those are the stories that I love to hear, like, or even just like what we found here, we found this species, or, we found evidence of such and such. And it was just fun. Like, I always enjoyed those stories. I always sat there and listened as long as I could, even if I was feeling sleepy and I had to get up early the next day. And that's what I was trying. Like, when I started the podcast, I started to try and recreate those feelings by trading stories with people, like having people come on the podcast and be like, tell me about this project, or tell me about what you're doing lately, and share it with everybody else. Like, essentially it's a conversation between the two of us, but everybody else is listening in like they're a fly on the wall, so they can get the same information and hopefully get the same feeling that I did doing that conversation. And I did about, 10 to 12 of those episodes. There was interviews, so it was once a week. And then I got the bug, and I'm like, I upgraded my microphone, and I'm like, I'm doing 5 days a week. And then after that, it was like, that was it for me.
Now, did you have any, obviously this is in the way early days of podcasts and YouTube. And so did you have any technical skills or how did you figure out some of this? How did you figure out some of this stuff, like with doing whether it was the YouTube or the podcast or how did you figure out some of this stuff early days?
I didn't. It was lots of mistakes, right? So podcasting back then, so this is like, you were looking at, I started listening to, somebody put me onto podcasts, a friend of mine that I used to play football with, put me onto podcasts, 2012, 2013. I started to listen to a bunch about entrepreneurship and things like that, and because I want to be an entrepreneur. And then I was like, oh, like there's nothing on oceans on this in the podcast. I think there was one. There was one show that was on oceans, and it hadn't run in a while. They haven't published episodes in a while. And so I first inquired about them. I was like, hey, can I do this podcast? Well, you have to follow this type of, because it was almost like a franchise. It was almost like a network. And so they were just like, it was a British one. You have to follow a specific way that they do things. And I was like, you know what? Maybe that's not for me. I want to kind of do it my own style. And so I kind of just said, you know what? I'll do it myself. And that's when I started to look at how easy or difficult it was, challenging it was to do, like to put a podcast up. And it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. You know, there was a lot of, there were hosting companies I had to find out about, and then there was ways to do this, and how do you record, and then how do you get it up there? I had to learn all of that. I had, you know, because I had the schooling in GIS, and so I learned a lot of different software, like remote sensing software and GIS software, statistical software. I had a little bit of experience in learning new things. And so it was just patience. It was a lot of time of like being on a computer for like 4 hours every night, you know, after the kids went to bed. And just kind of like my eyes would come out and be all red, you know, just from looking at a screen the whole time, trying to figure out how to do this stuff. And when I first did it, it was so bad, Dave. Like I joined a hosting company through another company, and then that company, so I had to upload it to that system. And I started to publish, and I was like, oh, this is great. And of course, you know, I'm a numbers guy, so I always like to look at statistics and like what my numbers are, the download numbers and stuff. And I didn't realize there's like a specific standard, but there's also ways like the numbers can be blown out of proportion. So there was one day I woke up, I had published it at midnight. I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I would do is check my downloads. I checked the downloads, and normally I'm getting like 25, you know, 26, 27. This one, Dave, I was at 22,000 downloads. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, holy cow. Like, this is awesome. Like, I've made it. I just said that. Like, I go, babe, I don't have to get a job anymore. I'm like, I made it. This is awesome. This is only in the morning. Let's see what happens at night. Then I find out all of those were ridiculous numbers. They were bots. They were this. They were that. And I was like, that sucks. And then the real hosting site, I went on to that hosting site, and it was like 30. So I had like 5 more than normal. It was just like, you know, then I realized that there's a standard and stuff. So a lot of it was fumbling through, you know, microphones and things like that. Like I had that Yeti microphone. If you probably can't see it, like if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, but there's a Yeti microphone just in the back there, and it worked well. I'll be honest, I probably didn't know exactly how to use it, but it echoed a lot because my room is not insulated for sound, right. So it echoed quite a bit,
right.
And so the sound didn't sound as good as it does now,
right.
And so I just upgraded my microphone, and I said I'm going to spend like $500 on this microphone, so I don't have any worry whatsoever. And I basically looked at the microphones that radio stations that were publishing online were using, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to find out. Okay, that's the Shure SM7B. All right, I'm going to go look it up on Amazon and find out what it was and buy it. And I ended up, actually, before I bought it, I actually rented a bunch of microphones at a local music store that I have here called Long and McQuaid, and I could rent it for like $15 a week. I was like, this is great. So I would do that. And then I found out the sound was really good, so I was like, this is perfect. I'll just buy that microphone. And then I got invited to do a conference at and I rented a bunch of microphones, and I went over there, and I had like 2 microphones that people would I would interview people with. So so it's like and it's just like when you look at these different things, a lot of times people would email me and be like, hey, your sound is awful on this one. Like you got to figure your stuff out. And I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, you know. And then you do it all over again. There were times like I think my first episode I recorded, they were 45 minutes long. Like one of my first solo episodes, I think I re-recorded it 3 times because I kept losing it. I kept deleting it by accident. I couldn't figure out how to save it on the software that I was using. You know, and so like there were some frustrating times. Like it wasn't easy. There was some times where I was like. I spent 3 hours recording one episode because I had to redo it every time, and so I think if you really want to do it, you figure it out, and that's just what I do. I fumble through things and I figure it out.
Now, did you have any how did you figure out like how doing like hosting and doing that type of stuff? How did you just kept doing it and just try to improve on what you were doing?
I was always a shy kid growing up.
Yeah.
When I got to university, I kind of came out of my shell. I forced myself to come out of my shell a little bit because I was like, I didn't have a good time socially in high school.
Right.
And so when I got to university, I said, I got to be different. I got to really show my personality. And so I would just kind of put myself out there, and that's what I did here. And it sucked. Like it was hard at times, especially a science person, like a young science person.
Yeah.
I was like, what if someone like Dave Ebert hates what I say? Like, or what if I'm wrong and I get excommunicated from the science world? I was very concerned about that. But in terms of my style, it's always just been, I genuinely want to know about what I invited this person on for, right? About their project, about what they've done in their lives, what they've accomplished. I'm that passionate about science and ocean conservation that I want it up. Like the questions I'm asking are generally questions, selfishly, of what I want to know. Yeah. I mean, and so the style just came from that.
Okay, I mean, you come across very polished, and like I'm still kind of stumbling along trying to figure it out myself after 5 years.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
But you come across very polished and everything. And I just want to mention one caveat to people. It's funny, people that do these things like you and me, like I was terribly introverted up until graduate school. I mean, people that knew me back in high school and even in college, undergrad, I was just terribly quiet. And what turned it around for me was when I was doing my master's, one of my professors, he said, you got to be able to communicate to, this was back in the 80s. He goes, you got to be able to talk to people. And I was saying, and I did try it. I kept taking seminar classes. But what really turned it around for me was this professor goes like, okay, Dave, if I can keep in mind, this is the 1980s, but he said, if someone's going to pay you $100 to get up and talk to that audience, what are you going to do? I'm like, $100? Hell yeah, I'll get up there and talk.
Just need the right motivation.
Oh man. And then it was just suddenly turned in, because what he did was it turned like this sort of introverted, shy experience. Like, wait, this is a job. I'm getting paid, damn it.
Yeah.
And so your mindset's totally different. Like, well, hell, I'm going to get up there and talk and do what I can do. And of course now it's completely gone to now where I'm hosting a show with you. And I'm interviewing you now for your own podcast.
Now your interview. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I thought it was good to share with people, like young people that might be quiet. It's the right motivation.
I think there's also something to say too. As I did like someone who's done his master's before, and obviously you've done your master's and your PhD, and had to defend in front of probably the most intimidating people at the time that you have, like your professors, their colleagues. There's an external professor who comes in, in person, and they travel to come to see you. Being able to talk science in front of them and answer their questions on the research that I was able to do, that's an intimidating moment. Like, you're nervous during that moment because, one, you don't want to look like a fool, and two, you don't want them to be disappointed in you, right? There's that mentorship kind of thing. And so I think my supervisor said it best, John Roth. He said, you know this even better than they do. You know this project better than they do. So they're just going to ask questions because they just want to know what you did. So they're not trying to fail you. They're just trying to understand what you did. And if you can explain what you did, you're good because you've already done all the work. So now you just have to talk about the stuff that you know best, and they're just trying to figure out what you've done. That's it. Right. And then of course there's the qualifying exam where they're trying to like see how much you know and dive down deep. Where I feel like those types of tests, those types of events kind of harden you a little bit as a scientist to be like, I'm just going to put myself out there and just see what happens. If I get critiqued, it's not personal. Sometimes it is, but you don't take it personally, and you just do what you got to do. And I think trying to keep them, I learned early on to try and keep the emotion out of being criticized. Then you realize not that many people are criticizing you, not to your face anyway. They're not telling me about it. Yeah. The odd person would be, but everybody else is like, this is really informative. Like, I'm really enjoying this show. And so that kind of boosted my confidence too. Mm-hmm. I even had a professor like from Guelph where I did my undergrad. I went back to teach, or I went back to talk to people about careers. And afterwards, Professor Robinson, he came up to me and he said, how did you learn like the way you interview? I'm like, what do you mean? Like the questions you ask, like how did you learn to come up with those? How did you learn to like ask such inquisitive questions? I'm like, and I just turned, I'm like, you taught me. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, my professors taught me. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm curious. Like, this is being a scientist. Like, you're asking questions because you generally want to know. I was never trained as a communicator. I don't even think I'm that good of a communicator. Like when I look at my critique myself, I'm just genuinely interested. And so I ask questions sometimes it's based on science, sometimes it's based on conservation. And all this stuff now, I've done so many interviews and I have so many different perspectives on how things are done around the world, even doing Beyond Jaws and really getting around the world. Now we're like, okay, like it's done this way in this country. Have you ever thought about doing it this way in our country or wherever? It's now you're just pulling from other things that kind of hit you at the time.
I kind of find too that like you kind of like there's that expression about if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
But also, I always had an interest in history, and I was very fortunate because my professors would tell stories about old-time ichthyologists, dead ichthyologists, long gone ichthyologists.
Right.
But they would have a connection where they knew these people going back. It'd be like your grandfather or great-grandfather. And I just used to enjoy the stories here and like, what was this person really like?
Yes.
And what kind of motivated him to do this stuff. So I always found that interesting. And then some of the journals I subscribe to, they run these stories on. Unfortunately, it's usually after they pass away.
Yeah.
The life history. And I know this guy just I've written a few of these obituaries for Leonard Campagno, my advisor, and I kind of felt like, and this gets into when I got to know you, we came up with this idea with the Beyond Jaws. It was really just to kind of instead of me telling the story about, oh yeah, so and so, it was to get the people actually on the podcast to tell their story in their words.
Yep.
And I think again, the young people, it's, I don't know how you feel, but I think it's great to be able to talk to someone who maybe you didn't know that person, but you're a connection or a conduit to, like, oh yeah, I knew that person. And I went and talked to,
100%. Like there are people that I've looked up to my entire career who have recently passed away and that have had an impact on my career. And so as a podcaster now, I'm like, how do I memorialize what they did for me or what they did for other people and what type of person they are? And the way I do is we've got these platforms. We got How to Protect the Ocean. We got Beyond Jaws. We were able to speak to Jeff Carrier, on the podcast, and people can see what he's like, on the podcast, to just be able to talk to him and hear from him. And I thought, once that, unfortunately when he passed, as sad as we we're like, hey, people get to know who he is through that podcast, so like for people who are like, hey, have you ever heard of Jeff Carrier? No. Okay, we'll go over here. He did a whole interview, and I just think I think there's something to say about that. It's that frame of reference, we always talk about in science, where it's like, use the coral reef kind of reference, where it's like coral reefs in the 50s were a lot different than what we see here. But, growing up in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we think of a different type of reef, right? But we think that is what the reference reef is, instead of the 50s and 60s reefs, where they were probably a lot more abundant.
Well, one of the people we had on, like Eugenie Clark is very well known in the field. Yes. She has an award through the American Elasmobranch Society, and I guarantee you, because I've asked all the ones we've had on there, they didn't know like someone like Gavin Naylor, who was on the podcast, was a student of hers.
Yeah.
And if you go back and listen to the podcast, which was one of the first ones we did with Gavin, he talks about what it was like to be a student of Jeannie's. And so here you can get a firsthand account. Yeah. You hear about Eugenie Clark's name a lot. Well, here you hear someone, and Gavin still goes to the meetings. If you see him at the meeting, I'm sure if you buy him a beer, he'll tell you all about Jeannie Clark and
for sure
and everything. And of course, there's been many others, but was a very prominent person. And I mean, of course, I knew her, but I wasn't a student of hers. Gavin actually was a student of hers. And so you can talk about some of these people like in a first person, like, well, what was she like to have as an advisor? And so I think that's the kind of stuff I would think like with your podcast and with the podcast we're doing with Beyond Jaws, is sharing those stories of the people that have kind of come before us, and even some in the moment now.
Well, and to be honest, that comes to like one of my next points that has kind of led me to where I am is meeting all these people. Yeah. It's amazing the response you get when you send out an email or you send a message or a DM and be like, hey, I would love to feature you on my podcast. I love your project. I've been following your career for a while, or just recently. I love what you're doing. I would love to promote you on the podcast. And then you just have a fun conversation. And it's not just, as Dave, as because this is how we met, not just the conversation on the podcast, the recording. It's the 2-hour conversation afterwards. where you really get to know the person, where you start to really dive into who that, and there's certain people I jive with really well, and there's others that just, they have to leave, and it's, then I thank them very much, and it's great, and they've done a great job on the interview, and it's wonderful. But it's that connection that you make, and then I continue to have them on my network, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok. We're talking, we're working on these volunteer projects together, or we do the podcast together. There's just so many ways that the opportunities have come just from having people on as a guest and doing them a favor and just being like, I really like the stuff you're doing. I'd love to share it with this little audience that I've built.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Well, and I can attest that because I had never, you were the first podcast I ever did. You invited me on it. I think we spent 2 hours talking about sports. Then we did the podcast and we spent another 2 hours talking about sports.
Yeah.
And then we ended up doing a shark podcast, and we should really probably be doing a sports podcast, but that'll be later on.
We just run out of time, Dave. We have no more times with all these podcasts.
Oh, I know. And I want to say one thing, and Andrew mentioned this, but I can't. I tell you, this guy works his tail off, because I'm on the West Coast out here in California, and he's in the East Coast in Toronto, and like. We'll be WhatsApping. It'll be like 9 o'clock my time, and I think he's gone to bed. He's still WhatsApping me. I've still got to record a show here or there, and I'm thinking like, dude, you got to get up in a few hours and actually go to work and stuff. So it takes a dedication and a passion to be able to do that, kind of come home from a day's job and then saddle up and just spend the night working on your podcasts that you're doing.
Yeah.
Stuff.
People underestimate how much work it is. When you're doing a podcast that regularly, like I'm over 1,900 episodes, to give people context. I think I've mentioned it on this podcast before. We've mentioned it on the other podcasts, and we're, I think, over 100 on but we do once every 2 weeks. So we've done a lot as well. Not even counting how many interviews we've actually done, because there's still the Guitarfish Wedgefish Symposium I'm still getting over. Doing those interviews, 4 interviews per episode. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But it's when people look at what's needed to be done, there's especially if you have an interview, you reach out to the person says yes, you do your research, you come up with a set of questions, you do a little pre-interview right before you record the interview. It takes like 45 minutes to an hour. Afterwards you talk maybe an hour or two, or a half hour, depending on the person. And then after that, you have to process it. You have to edit it. You have to put it together, maybe do an intro and outro to it. If it's a solo show, you just do it in one shot. Then you have to go through the processing. You have to come up with a transcript. You have to do the show notes, the blog posts. You have to do the social media posts, a newsletter. There could now with the YouTube component and everything, it takes hours. Now obviously I do it all on my own. I do have an editor now because of the videos. But it's allows and I use a lot of AI to help me with processing everything, to give time back. I want, I'm at a point now in my life where I want time back in my evenings, so I can relax. I'm getting older. I'm almost 48. I want my time back. I know. I'm not as old as you. I understand.
Don't even go there, man.
But Dave, I'll tell you something. You work your butt off. I'll give you that. But you enjoy your time with your family, your folks. You enjoy your time swimming. You enjoy as I think sometimes as marine biologists, we tend to burn ourselves out a lot. By doing all these passion projects or doing stuff for free, or for you, Dave, people email you all the time, hey, I found this, can you help me identify it? That kind of stuff. Other projects that you do, workshops and everything. And of course the travel. So it's when we have the downtime, I've realized, at my age that downtime is really important.
Yeah.
I tell that to young marine biologists too. It's get your work done if you want, build your skills, do that, what you need, but also don't forget to enjoy yourself too, having some downtime.
If I was going to say one other thing I'd say too at my age is that reinventing yourself, and in my case, getting into this, doing this science communication, the podcast and the stuff I've been doing with you. If you had asked me 20 years ago, even when I was your age, I'd have been like, I was just pretty much the science. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, the landscape's changed a lot because there wasn't really the opportunities with the different platforms now. But I was pretty much hardcore. I love doing the science. I mean, I hate to use the term hardcore, but I mean, I was just excited about it every day. I was like, oh wow, I'm going to go. Let's see what we're going to discover today. It's Christmas again. Yes, every day. But I also found, as I kind of advanced in my career, I hit to a point where it's like, well, do I need to do another, whatever publications or this and that? I still enjoy doing that, but I find learning a whole new area like this science communication thing. I've kind of been on this journey with you, really. It's just been a really exciting to me because it's just something new. It's a challenge.
It is
to learn this stuff, and I can tell you, it's a lot of work. If people listening out there, like, if you think you're like, oh, I'll go start a podcast, it's a lot of work, and I don't do a fraction of what Andrew does, but I can tell you, just doing our Beyond Jaws podcast, it's a passion project now for me because I really enjoy it, but it's not easy, and it takes time to do. And I think you told me this, Andrew, like most podcasts are maybe get 10 episodes tops out of them. Yeah, if that. And we're up around, I think almost about 150 episodes now for the Beyond Jaws. So it's not, again, we got a long ways to catch up to your other show, but but considering we started from nothing, it was just a concept and an idea, really, and we've kept it going.
I think the thing I always go by the mantra. It's like, I'm going to outwork everybody else.
Yeah.
I may not have the best skill set. I may not have I may not be the most intelligent person in the room, but I'm going to outwork the heck out of you. And I learned that at a young age playing football is I can outwork you. And if I outwork you, then I'm going to have a one up on you, and it's going to benefit me in every way. And I think, you talk about doing the pivot. I've pivoted a few times. I didn't know after my master's, I didn't know where I was going to fit in. Coming home to Ontario, I didn't know if I was ever going to find something I liked. Like I said, I did the marine consulting or the environmental consulting. Didn't love it. I I worked a little bit nonprofit during my master's, and it was fun, but it doesn't pay much. It's hard to have a family on those types of salaries and live in the area that we live in. We live in a very expensive area in Southern Ontario, or not very expensive, but it's tough to live. We got in at the right time. Let's just say.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I don't know if I can afford a home if I was starting out today. I don't think many of us could. But regardless, it's a difficult thing, and when you don't really feel like you're in the place where you belong. And I never felt satisfied with doing something until I started doing science communication, because I started to get really good at it. And in terms of I enjoyed it a lot. Every time I do an interview, still to this day, I get pumped. I'll even go talk to my wife about it. My wife would be like, "Oh my God, here he goes! He's ready to talk about it. He's ready to talk about science." But I get super excited because it's something new. I get to talk, especially when I get to talk to either colleagues that have come on a number of times, or with people that I'm just first meeting and getting to know their projects. It's an exciting time for me to do it. And so it was once I found that out, once I figured that out, I started to tell myself, I'm like, this is what I want to do. In marine, this is where I'm going to excel. And I didn't know if it was going to be continuing with the podcast on my own and building that out as a business, which I didn't know how to do at any point in time. I don't have Joe Rogan numbers. I don't want to be Joe Rogan, but I don't have Joe Rogan numbers. Who's the highest, he's probably the person who gets the most podcast downloads per episode. But I also I really like doing this. So I didn't know if that was going to be it, or if I was going to find a job with somebody. And I have applied to a lot of science communication jobs over the years. And I don't know if it was just I didn't communicate well what I do, or people. I also wonder if the marine conservation world don't really have an understanding of how powerful podcasting is in a way for marine science, right? And for science in general.
Well, if I can speak from just having gone, I've kind of transverses these different eras, and one of the things in the science fields, and I think obviously I can speak firsthand to marine science, but I think in a lot of the sciences, a problem has been communicating to the public, because there's been very few people, and I'd say even today, that are really credible scientists that actually cross over and do like the podcast type of stuff or science outreach stuff. Most of the people, they're one or the other. They find a niche and I'm not saying either one's bad, but if you have somebody who understands the science, and they can communicate that, because the scientists traditionally and even today, I think a lot of the ones that do a lot of the really cutting edge stuff, they're busy doing their cutting edge stuff, and they just don't have time to talk to people. And when they do, then they don't break it down so the average person can understand what they're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. I've talked about one of my mentors early in my career, John McCosker, who was a director of the Steinhardt Aquarium. And I kind of realized at the time, but he was one of the few people I knew who could take a complicated thing, and he could literally, because I was with him sometimes, he could talk to the guys in the dock about something, and in simple terms. I don't mean simple terms, but in a layman's term that they could understand. And he wasn't talking down to them, but they'd oh yeah, I get what. Oh, now I understand that. And unfortunately, most people in the field don't do that. I was fortunate because I recognized it with him, but he was one of the few at that time that could do that. Most of the people would get really enthusiastic, and I'd hear this over and over, like, wow, that guy really is enthusiastic, but I have no idea what he's talking about.
Exactly. Or they don't care enough. It's not enticing enough. People are used to storytelling. Yes. And we need to bring that emotion back into storytelling from the science. We need to extrapolate the science that people need to know. We need to put it in a way that and that takes a while for scientists to be able to do, because we've been trained to be analytical, and we've been trained to, as Randy Olson says, speak to the brain. So if I give you facts, you should be able to understand it, and that will change your behavior, because it's a logical thing to do. Humans don't act logically a lot of times. A lot of times we'll act on emotion. So if you make it funny, sad, make them angry, make them happy, that was like, you go for their gut, that's what it does. But I think, going back to what you're saying in terms of like why podcast is such a good platform, is people listen to podcasts longer than any other platform. Maybe YouTube now is a little bit better because it's getting a little longer, but even then, you're looking at these short form video platforms like Instagram and TikTok. You're looking at under 3 minutes. YouTube, you're looking at between 3 to 5 minutes. Podcasts, on average, people listen between 20 and 45 minutes.
Well, it's because you can take your little device here and take it out. You can take your device and go out and put your earbuds on or whatever and go for a walk. You can go for a drive in the car.
Yeah, go exercise.
I sometimes, especially in California, people, they'll commute 1 to 2 hours a day each way going to where they work. And you put on a podcast,
and you're good.
And you're good. Put on Beyond Jaws, hopefully, and or How to Protect the Ocean, and So tell us about this job you just career change.
So I am now as of so this is going to go up the Good Friday. So as of next week, whenever you're listening, as of the 7th, I'm going to be an oceans communication manager for a consulting firm called Pisces Ocean. And their tagline is eliminating barriers to ocean project success. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind that is we work with clients that could be for-profit companies, non-profit organizations, academic institutions that have projects, and we help them. Not only we have kind of like pillars, so we'll do like strategic consulting. That's one pillar. We'll have another pillar that's like project management and grant management for projects. And then there's the communication side. So the idea around all of it as it fits together is we help make their projects more successful, by helping them. Like a lot of academic institutions, usually they'll have labs or they'll have, a collaborative project, let's just say, and they may not have the resources to handle all the administration for grants or how to manage that project, or they may not have the people to do the project management, but they also may not have the consulting, and they may not be able to tell their story properly, and so we work with clients to do that. And I'll be the ocean communications manager. Obviously I have a science background, have the communication background. So we'll be working with clients from all over, the spectrum of working in the ocean. I always like to say working with companies, projects, nonprofits who have a net positive impact on the ocean. And so that's like, the consulting that I did back, in the early 2000s was all about working with companies who have almost a net negative impact on the ocean. Here we're working with the opposite. And it's exciting because there's going to be, clients that are working with AI to reroute shipping channels to so that they stay away from high biodiverse areas or out of whales migration routes, and still be efficient for gas and diesel and stuff like that. So all these different types of projects that we get to work with. I remember I told you I really like working on different projects when I was working for a DFO. Like I get to do the same thing here, and I get to do communication. So that includes a number of different things, and it'll be different for every client, but maybe helping them with podcasting, helping them with social media, helping them design their website, just really strategize on the storytelling aspect. And that'll be the fun part. I get to use my creativity. I get to use the science, and then I get to bring that all together into telling like a really good story for each of those clients that are unique to them, the clients, but also something that people can really, grab a hold of and learn and be able to speak about as well. So super exciting. It came from the person who hired me, Natalie Gilson, who's the co-CEO at this company. We've been friends for a few years now. She found me through the podcast. She was working. She had her own marketing shop. She wanted to get more of working in an area where she had more of an impact, especially on the ocean, because she loved the ocean so much. And then she found the podcast, and she's like, "This is great. This guy's Canadian." We actually lived. We lived maybe like 45 minutes away from each other. We had some conversation. I had her on the podcast. We just talked a lot about different things. And then recently at the World Ocean Conference, I got offered a job to work with her, and which we had talked about on and off for a bit. Just never came to be at the right time, and now it's like super exciting. We're ready. We're gung ho for doing this, and it's pretty exciting on a number of different levels, Dave. Not only because of the job I get to do, but the work that I put in over the last like 16 years in communication to get all that experience, to get to do something that I love full time. I've been working. One thing that we haven't really discussed, I've been working a separate job for the last like 6.5 years just to pay the bills. And I was working in software, which I had a great time doing. I love the people I work with. I learned a lot. But it wasn't like there's always still this hole like that. I'm like, right. I didn't belong there. I belong to do something different and more important for me.
Right. And I think, you said the thing you said there too. And like, you talked earlier about how I kind of like have where I'm at in my life now, I have different things, but back when I was younger than you even, but even at that point, I've talked a little about this in some of the shows, but I did a lot of different things, but I kept my eye on the ball where I wanted to go, and that's the big thing. And people talk about going in the field, and they're 28 years old and they can't figure out why they can't find a job. And it's like, well, it might take you a while to after grad school it was 10 years at least after I finished my PhD before I actually found a job. Actually, probably a little more than 10 years. I worked in aquaculture.
Yeah.
It
was abalone, right?
Yeah, I did abalone for 10 years. Yeah. And it was a business my brother and I started with a few other partners just because we couldn't find a job. So we just literally created our own job. But what I kept doing though, and this is exactly what you did, I'd finish, and when you're in your business for yourself, like aquaculture, you're farming, and so it's not like an 8 to 5 job. But when I'd finish up the end of the day, I'd go home, and every night, 3-4 hours, usually till midnight or so, I would be at home working on papers, doing on different projects. I was working on my shark. That was my shark time. You and I are so parallel like that, Andrew.
Oh yeah.
It was just, and I did that for 10 years, and so until I had an opportunity to go back into doing sharks. And that's sometimes you have to do that extra. And the only reason I got the job when it opened up was because they saw me at conferences. I was publishing more papers in the 90s than people with actual jobs in the field.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, and I was fortunate, my former advisor, Greg Kai, recognized that. And when he had an opportunity with some funding he hired me to come in and run the Pacific Shark Research Center with him and start it up. But it was the same thing. Like, I was, my days didn't end till after midnight pretty much. And I had to be up at 5 to go do, so I was, maybe getting 5 hours sleep at night.
Oh, I know that
that's why I'm
familiar.
That's why when I get these messages from you and I know it's after midnight your time, I appreciate that, and I'm very respectful because I know I was there for a lot of years, and then you kind of hit that point now where, like, I put in the pretty good times, but you've got other commitments, and just like, I don't need to be up to 1:00 this morning doing that at this point in my life and stuff,
Absolutely. And I think now it's like, it's come down to one, it's like coming up with a good workflow, like an efficient workflow. And I've learned that through friends over the years and consultants that I've hired over the years and coaches that I've hired is, if you're going to do this separate and build those skills, like, you have to have a good workflow where, like, I'm going to work these days, and you got to set boundaries, and other days I'm going to have some time off. And now, like, it's paid off where, there's going to be, the podcast is going to be involved, not always with Pisces, like where I'm working now, but there'll be some clients that we have on the podcast there because they're really important to what I want to do with the podcast. And so there's going to be a blend in that a little bit. So it's not always going to be separate. It's not always going to be like I have to stay up till 11 just to record podcasts or something like that. No, like, I'll be able to do it pretty early. I'll get my evenings back. That's what I'm really excited, because not only am I going to be working my butt off during the day for Pisces and the podcast, but it's like I get my evenings back. I get to work out again on a regular basis. I get to spend time with my kids a little bit more, my wife, a little bit more. Like, it's just to relax a little bit more, and that's important to me at this point in time, and to get to a point where I can, 8 hours a day. I've been saying this for 16 years. I just want to get to a point where I can work on oceans during the day, 8 hours a day, and now I get to do that. I think it's really great, and I get to work with these great companies, organizations, and projects that are doing good for the ocean. And I get to have a hand in that, and I think that's really great. And I'll tell you, like, the interview was very there was like, you can almost say there was no formal interview process. This was done over years, and it was done getting to know each other and how we work together and doing.
It's a relationships, a network.
It's a relationship, right? It's working on volunteer projects together. It's seeing how we are. Personality rise. So it's almost been, I guess, like a 3 to 4 year interview process, if you really want to put it that way. But we work really well together, and I've met, like, it's going to be a small boutique consulting firm from now. We will be growing, and I'll hopefully be part of that. And I'm looking to like really do some great things, and I'll talk about it on the podcast. Of course, I'll talk about it on Beyond Jaws and stuff, but this is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm, like, ready to dive in, head first on this and kick some butt for the ocean.
Well, great. Well, Andrew, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show here and how to protect the ocean and follow up on how it's going with the job. And we certainly talk about it on the Beyond Jaws podcast as well.
Yes.
And I just want to thank you for coming on the show today. And
you bet.
And sharing
thank you for having me as a
sharing
guest.
your journey here and everything. And so we'll see how the show does in the metrics here. And you might see me back on the show after this.
No. That's insane. Of course, we're going to have you back. We'll have you back for your own stuff too. Yeah. And people, like, check out How to Protect the Ocean. Like, we talk about careers all the time. Beyond Jaws. Yeah. We talk to people who are meandering in and out of careers. Like, we say this every time, and people agree with us, that our guests agree with us, is it's not a straight path. It's very rare where it's a straight path from going from graduate school or going from undergrad and working right in there and doing exactly what you want. Because science is different, and you never know what you're going to love, whether it's the science side, the conservation side, the business side. You never know what you're going to be able to do and where it's going to lead you to. And there's going to be pivots. There's going to be that. But check out Beyond Jaws, because that podcast really shows in real life what it's like.
And if I get one other plug too, my other YouTube channel, which is on Lost Shark Guy, we got a documentary series Andrew is working on with me it's titled "Searching for Lost Sharks, Extinct or Alive," and I tell stories literally, and that's a whole other thing for a conversation for another time. But that I blundered into. But it's share stories, and one thing I have to say about being at my point in career. And this next episode is coming. I share a lot of my own personal journey and connection with a lot of these sharks that we're looking for. And the next one, the river sharks story, is coming up here.
Oh man,
it should be dropped in the next 10 days or so. And check it out, because I talk in that one and share about how the whole field of, in part, shark conservation started, because there was no field when I started. It's hard for young people to think about this, and we'll talk about this maybe on one of our Beyond Jaws, but there was no field of shark conservation when I started out in the 80s. It just didn't exist. It was not a term at all.
No,
so
people didn't want to know that much about it. Well, and it goes, to be honest, it goes to show like that work, my work on that, doing the editing for that, doing the editing for videos, doing the editing for podcasting, whether they're videos or audio, doing social media, doing newsletter management, doing webinar management. All of these things have helped me get this job.
Yeah.
To a point where, like, I have to admit, my new boss was like, "How have you not been hired for this type of job earlier?" When someone says that to you, you're like, okay, like this is kind of cool. And then you realize, like, I got to start talking about more what I do, because people don't realize. But like that's really what it comes down to. And like I talked about it earlier this week in one of our episodes. Like, if you can't find experience by doing a job, there's a lot of ways you can do it yourself. And figure that out. It's sacrificing, there's no doubt about it. For me, it was time and some sleep, but for the most part, you can do it, and you can do it pretty well, and still have a life while you do it. Like I have to admit, like, my podcast frequency of publishing is a little insane, and because I love it so much. But for most people who want to do one show a week, or one show a month, or one show every 2 weeks, it's work, but it's not as bad as you think. And so, definitely think about that, because communication is a big growing part of the conservation field. So with that said, Dave, thanks for hosting. I do appreciate it.
No problem, buddy.
And we'll look forward to having you back on soon, and I will be asking you the questions next time.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Happy conservation. Bye-bye.